So I'm going to call the January 25th Ad hoc Parking Committee meeting to order. The first item of business is approval of the January 4th minutes. Any comments on them or thoughts? So, all in favor of approving them? Bob, are you an aye?
Aye, I'm aye.
There you are. Thanks. Okay. So we have a number of discussion items. Manager Bryant, can you give us an update on the parking controller hiring process?
Sure. So the position has been advertised, and the deadline for applications is this Friday. So anyone out there who wants to be the parking controller for the borough, the 28th is your deadline. Speaking with Chief Gallagher last week, the borough had gotten in 4 applications, and he thought they were all very quality applications. So so far so good. And Chief Gallagher and Sergeant Bernaccio, are going to do interviews next week, and then we're hoping to have interviews done and background check done and all that kind of thing in time for the February 17th Borough Council meeting for Borough Council to confirm, to review the resume and application and confirm the hiring of our recommended candidate.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yeah. It'll be, someone the other day pointed out that, not me, someone else, the borough engineer pointed out the other day that once that's done, this will be the first time the borough is fully staffed since December of 2020.
Wow. Wow. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Woo-hoo. We like that.
Well, that's good, really good news.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. And thanks to the chief and the sergeant for keeping this and making their plan.
And I just want to give one last thanks, just so everyone knows what's been going on. I do want to thank the police for the parking enforcement they've been doing, as well as Mike Kennedy from our Public Works Department, who's been going and collecting the coins from the meters and depositing them at the bank. So.
Great. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great of them to do that. Okay. Super. Okay. Is there an update on the Park Mobile implementation? Council approved the contract last week? Yeah. Time flies. I'm like, wait, was it last Wednesday? Yes, it was.
Yeah, so following council's approval, the solicitor and I had one last conversation about it. He and I were generally fine with, for the most part, with the contract that council ended up approving. The only change I think that's going to happen to it is there's some reference in it to the laws of the state of Georgia, and we request that be changed to the laws of the state of Pennsylvania, which Park Mobile is going to accommodate. So I'm just waiting to hear back from Park Mobile in terms of what the implementation process and timeline is going to be.
Okay. All right. Cool. That's exciting. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the municipal lot parking. Do you have an update for us on that?
Yeah, so the borough solicitor has just about finished an ordinance on that. He actually sent it to me yesterday afternoon, and I apologize, I just didn't have an opportunity to forward it to the committee last night. So I'd like for that to be, if that's okay with with our chair, I'd like for that to be on the agenda for the next parking committee meeting.
Sure.
The one component that the solicitor is still really working on is there's some regulations about towing that he and I need to work out as well. It's kind of funny, this is kind of like one of those things where like you kind of start to pull on one string and then you find like 2 or 3 other things you have to fix as well.
Yeah.
But I feel pretty confident that we'll have a fully done draft ordinance for the next parking committee meeting.
Super. Yeah, I totally get the pulling threads. That's what we found on this committee. Every time we think we're making, we like, oh, okay, here we go. We're like, oh, now there's something else to consider. So totally understand.
And also, I'm sorry, going back to Park Mobile again, I really want to give credit where it's due and make sure the public and the committee understand all the moving parts on some of these things. I want to give Michelle Carroll credit for reaching out to United Public Safety, who does our existing ticketing for parking meters, and working on getting the coordination started between Park Mobile and that as well.
Okay, super. That's great. Okay.
Is that where we insert thank you, Michelle Carroll?
Sorry, what's that, Bob?
Is that where we insert thank you, Michelle Carroll?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is to come back to our ongoing conversation about residential parking. And I had asked, in preparation for today's meeting, I had asked the committee to watch a portion of the May 8th, 2019 Public Safety Committee meeting where the prior borough manager had laid out proposed changes to residential permit parking, and watch that as well as read some of the comments that we received from residents over the last bit. I mean, one of them was one that came in shortly after that meeting that a fellow council member forwarded to us because the person had emailed their comments. So to review all those and be ready to, with things that we want to think about as we talk through this. So as I watched that video, some things occurred to me that said, yeah, okay, we've kind of talked about it, but I want to make sure we're really aware of what, of what we think we want to recommend to council this go round, as opposed to maybe what was either planned at that point or in that Nelson Nygaard had recommended. And the big thing that I saw initially, and then I want to hear if Rob and Bob, if you saw something, but the one thing that jumped out to me was that what was being suggested, and I think what was in the Nelson Nygaard report, was this idea that not every street would be a permit parking street, that instead there would still be, in this sense, they weren't calling them 2-hour zones necessarily, although Sean did refer to taking the borough and having the 3 zones like Nelson Nygaard suggested and overlaying that over the existing 2-hour zones. So he kind of was saying 2-hour zones would stay. Nelson Nygaard doesn't say that directly. They just say not every street within one of those 3 zones would be a permit parking street. I think when we've been talking about this, when we're thinking about rolling it out to the whole borough at some point, I think we were thinking that every street would be a permit parking street, but I'm not sure now. So I'm like, I want to hear what the committee thinks about that. But also, before we could either talk about that now, or we could, if you had some reaction to that video that made you say, ooh, yeah, we should talk about this some more. So I'm open to either one. So, Rob?
Yeah.
Rob wants to say something.
Bob, just briefly.
No, take your time. Take your time.
Okay, there are only a few streets that are unregulated. Isn't that true? Currently, like my
That's
street,
true.
for example, Marion, I think is one of the only streets on the south side.
Really?
Where stickers are not required or permits.
Really? Okay. Well, see, my experience on the north side is very different.
Okay. So there are many streets unregulated.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think that's probably, sorry to interject here, I mean, my guess, having only been here for like 8 months, but my guess is probably because of the amounts of multifamily on the north side versus the south side, given that multifamily properties aren't allowed to have the 2-hour Currently aren't allowed to have 2-hour ones. That's kind of my guess.
I see.
Could be.
Hmm.
And maybe as well for people who, my other guess is why that would be is people maybe who work and, it might have been some allowance for people who work on Haverford Ave or something like that as well.
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay, so
It-
I mean, it's been such a piecemeal system.
Yes.
So it seems like this was the opportunity to kind of clean it up, but so I don't know, Bob, what do you think?
Bob?
Yeah,
you wanna-
so I'm not sure if I'm one of the hazards of not being in the room with you. I'm not exactly sure where the discussion's going, but I do know Barbara was asking about sort of impressions from that meeting. And should I just start with that?
Sure, we don't need to go in any particular order, I don't think, because there's a lot, I think
Okay.
there's a lot to come from our discussion, so.
I'm not sure if I'm connecting to the thought that you guys were just discussing or not. Anyway, there are some advantages to, say, adopting the 3 Nelson-Nygaard zones without necessarily regulating every street within the zone. And I think that's what they were trying to capitalize on, because let's say if you establish the 3 zones, but the only people who are required to have parking the only people who have the option of purchasing on-street parking, and this is not what they were saying. They were saying that if you live in Zone A, if you live anywhere on the south side, you're eligible to purchase an on-street parking permit for $50. But what I think we should consider is establishing the 3 zones, but the only people eligible to purchase an on-street parking permit would be the way we currently have it set up. It'd be like if you live on a 2-hour zone. But I think by establishing the full zone, then we can layer on later, say, designated parking areas for people who work in the borough or for people who live in multifamily within that district. So, and that's a way to begin to address the needs of, say, people who live in multifamily on Haverford Avenue in the 30-minute zones. Like if we had, say, some portions of the borough that were designated for for people. I'm being interrupted by a child. Excuse me, a dog. Here, John, I'm in a meeting. Excuse me. I'd like us to consider how we could. I'm sorry, I got off track here.
It's okay.
Anyway.
So
I don't know that what I'm saying really makes any difference. We always have the option in future of establishing new zones for special purposes, and so it doesn't matter. I just experienced watching that meeting with a little bit like a bit of a medieval torture chamber, and I felt like, sort of like I thought we were going in a better direction by and large, and I don't know that there was much to learn from it. So there's my summary. Thank you.
sure. I think for me, what it made me do is just think more about what it is that we've been talking about. So I kind of want to loop back to what my opening question was, which I think I need to stay in a different way now. So we've talked a lot on this committee about the value of parking on the street that everybody in the borough gets for free, basically. Yes, we pay, part of our taxes pays for the upkeep of the street, but that's really all. If we all had to pay to park in some private space because let's say there was no parking allowed in the borough on the streets, we'd be paying a lot. And so we recognize that we are not capturing the value of that amenity that we're providing to our residents. And so I guess when we've had those conversations, for me, the conclusion that comes from that is that we want everyone, everywhere in the borough, at some point, maybe not right now in the first rollout of this, but eventually everyone to be paying something if they want to park a car on the street. Now, am I wrong in thinking that that's where, that was kind of like our underlying policy/philosophy approach? And maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, the logic is very consistent, Barbara, so I think that makes sense, but it would be very upsetting, I guess, for the unregulated streets to experience this
It would
transition. But it would also be, it's also going to be a transition for people that are currently paying very little.
Right.
So it would be a change for everybody, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I guess I would agree. I don't know, Bob, do you have a reason why we should keep certain streets unregulated? Well, we can
I mean, I'll admit from an administrative standpoint, I'd rather all the streets be regulated, because then, I'll admit from an administrative standpoint, then you don't have to play a guessing game or look at the map every time someone comes in or any of that sort of thing. The only thing I would say, and we talked about this before, that is, if the borough did go in that direction, then we would have to figure out what to do about, people who aren't currently allowed to have 2-hour permits.
Right, right. You have to have an option for that.
Yeah. But I agree that, again, I'm not the policy person here. I'm the responsible for the doing, but just from my reading of the borough's comp plan and things like the climate action plan and the things I've heard from council and the other committee meetings I've attended, it sounds like the strong goal of the borough is to move towards a multimodal future. And I think for the borough to effectively be subsidizing vehicular car-based transportation in the form of subsidized parking runs counter to those goals.
Right, right. And, the other thing that we've talked about is it's not that this is a way to get general revenue for the borough at all. This is a way to have funds that can be used to improve the streetscape, to improve how easy it is to navigate a street. So maybe not just with a car, but with a bicycle or on foot or with a stroller. So maybe we'd have enhanced crosswalks in places, or we'd have bump outs, and so this would give us the funds to do a lot of that. So that's kind of, I know we've had that conversation, and so I think that's kind of where I made this assumption that, this is where we wanted, the direction we wanted to go. And when I watched this 2019 meeting, that's clearly not the direction they were going. They were going to they weren't going to make any change to which streets were regulated or not. They were just going to use the existing regulations and overlay the zone and say that if you lived on one of those 2-hour streets, you could park anywhere in that zone. And that's kind of what Nelson Nygaard was suggesting too.
And I guess maybe I need to go back and read the Nelson Nygaard study, but I guess I still don't understand what the benefit of the zones are in the sense that people are going to park closest to wherever they live.
Exactly.
So I just, again, I'll admit, thinking of the additional work administratively we have to do to create and enforce these zones, I'm just not sure what the benefit to the public would be of having the zones.
Yeah, and I think maybe the reason they came up with separate zones, I'm not sure, because I don't think they say it specifically, but I think it was because they saw different patterns of utilization, depending on, are you near the train station or the business district or whatever. And so they were recommending different hours of enforcement for the different zones. So zone 1, which they defined as south of the railroad tracks, and zone 2, which was kind of the business district, but reaching all the way up to Stewart/Woodbine. So, so in other words, people who might be parking their cars there and then walking to the train, I think, was also, both those two zones were 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days a week. And then north of zone 2 would be noon to midnight, 7 days a week. So maybe that's the only real difference. And why they were suggesting that. And then they...
I'm also thinking, Barbara...
Go ahead.
I just have one other thing to add to that. I think that they had come to the conclusion that we had way too many specific zones and that there were too many distinctions, and that they felt that it would work just as well to have broader zones and let anybody on the south side park their car anywhere, and their hope was that fewer streets would want to have the 2-hour designation, and they could start repealing some of the regulation of the specific 2-hour zones.
Yeah.
Like that we were it had been overdone, and that they could sort of peel away some of it. I think that was part of the thinking too.
Yeah, because when they describe that, they say, permits should not be designated for a specific street within a parking zone. As enforcement capabilities expand via license plate reader system, moving to a street-by-street system is plausible if operational issues are detected with the previous zone-based approach. So, yeah, but, yeah. So I think that's, probably comes down to they wanted to enforce at different times. And that's one of the things that I think we still need to discuss is, are we comfortable with the enforcement hours they were suggesting if we're comfortable with the 3 zones and all of that. So, that's kind of on the list too. Because, as we were talking through this, we have to keep in mind, we've talked about how we just want to initially do this for one zone, in the sense, just do it where we have existing 2-hour, where we have existing regulated streets. I like using that terminology. And then eventually rolling it out, maybe more. And what does that mean when we talk about rolling it out, possibly rolling it out more? Is that, creating more regulated streets in the borough, so kind of piecemeal? Or is that, no, everyone in the borough now needs a permit to park on the street? And I guess that's the, so that maybe we don't need to decide that right now, but I think it is something that we're going to have decided by the time we take our finished product to council. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the thing I'll say about the enforcement, and I have a lot of thoughts on that, but again, that's the committee's job to sort out, not mine. With the enforcement, Chief Gallagher, the committee and myself all working together, did update the parking controller job description to explicitly kind of note that there might be some varied hours involved in the job. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, we're not going to have someone, even for our current hours of enforcement, which I think someone emailed the borough about one of those public comments in the packet. Even for our current system, someone's not going to be able to every hour of enforcement be out there doing it. But the thought is kind of, if you just vary someone's schedule here and there, there'd be enough of a random chance of someone getting caught to deter people from breaking the rules. Now, of course, I think the chief will be responsible for managing the person, but my own thought is, for someone's quality of life, I don't think you want to constantly be yanking their schedule around all over the place. But I do think the job description is clear. There are going to be some, modified shifts for the position, especially because the borough previously wasn't enforcing Saturdays at all, even for the meters. I think there are going to be especially some Saturday shifts in there. And I could certainly see if the borough, went beyond the current 6 p.m., some occasional, evening shifts in there to enforce that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, I'm not sure where that leaves us.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean,
Yeah. Go
it
ahead,
seems
Rob.
like Bob is saying there may be value to kind of having regulated streets and unregulated streets, and you're saying let's just go fully regulated because that's
Asking if that's something we want to
Yeah.
consider.
If I may, again, this, I'm just gonna throw this out there just maybe to give the committee something to focus on or maybe rally around here. I mean, maybe like how we've been approaching everything else. Maybe the approach is to start with, we keep the current unregulated versus regulated streets. And on the currently regulated streets, we make the changes we want to make to it. So for example, we talked about changing the fee, we talked about getting rid of you have to park on your street sort of thing, and expanding the enforcement, which we just talked about for a minute.
Mhm.
And if there's any other changes we want to make, I think we do it first on the streets that are already regulated, because that'll be less of a, we can adjust those changes and make sure they work.
Yep.
And then I do think, my opinion would be that once we know for sure that what we have is working on the regulated streets, we could then have the conversation about expanding it to the unregulated streets and have the conversation about how do we allow for parking for people who don't currently have parking if all the streets were regulated.
Mhm.
So that kind of like gives us more time to have those other conversations.
True.
That sounds exactly right to me.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay. So I think what we're saying is we have some bigger questions that we're willing to maybe put off bringing an answer to council or suggestion to council that what we want to do, what we'd like to get our arms around and have a good proposal for is what we would do with the existing 2-hour zones that we have right now. Existing regulated streets. I want to keep coming back to saying that because I really like that. I like that much better than, I don't know, for some reason, throw in zones, I get myself confused. So,
Oh yeah, well I do too because I live on a street that's not regulated at all.
Yeah.
So it's very confusing.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So does that sound like something that makes sense? And so that means that we might be going to council and I don't know, a couple more meetings of ours to hash out whatever else we might need to hash out about a plan for the existing regulated streets. We would be going to them with that proposal and saying, we are still discussing how this might be, what we might do for the rest of the borough. Because, one option is to do what Nelson Nygaard suggested, which is the borough doesn't create any more regulated streets unless residents of a block petition the borough to do that, and they've suggested a very specific process for how you determine lots of quantitative stuff, whether it was necessary to regulate that street. So that would be one option that we could take. But then the other option would be, we think there's a real value to this subsidy that the borough is giving everyone, and that we all should be paying for it with the eye that the revenue is going to go towards improving all of our experience with the public infrastructure. Does that sound like the right way to go?
Yeah.
Rob's saying yes. Bob, what do you think?
I'm definitely a yes on that.
Okay.
I think it's important to communicate. Let me just say it like this. Is it important to communicate to the public, say, for example, to the people who live on Haverford Avenue and have some expectation that there might be some place they can keep their cars? Currently, they can keep them on unregulated streets, which there are an abundance of. I see 5 spots in front of my house at this moment, for example, for someone who lives on Haverford Avenue. But maybe we do, at some point, we do give the expectation that we will layer on additional parking districts, especially for those people. Like, and even for Hadford Avenue, some of those might be on the south side. They might have to walk a block or two, but at least they know there's some special parking areas designated for them.
Well, but that would only be necessary if we stay with just some streets being regulated, I think, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. It makes that possible.
Yeah, so if instead at some point we end up saying every street is regulated, then the person who lives in an apartment on Hadford pays the permit to park on the street just like anybody else, and they get to park on any street within their zone, except at a metered space, because we're not going to let people park in a metered space with a permit. So I think that I hear what you're saying, Bob, but I think that's a path that's a plan we
to be determined.
Yes, if we followed one path versus if we go down the other path. There's going to be different things that we'll have to decide depending on which fork we take.
Agreed.
Is there something under our, let me ask, do you think we could move now to talking about what we're planning to roll out initially, which is applying these changes to the existing regulated streets? Are we ready to shift to that conversation? Bob, is that okay? I'm going to
Yes.
do this again. Okay, thank you. So, is there something about the folks? So the zone, the area that we're talking about, in where the regulated streets now are, basically in what Nelson Nygaard defines as Zone 1 and Zone 2. So south of the railroad, of the train tracks, and then business district, but up to Stewart/Woodbine, because there's some regulated streets up there. So we've got a fair number of multifamily spaces in there. We have a number of people who live on blocks where there's only metered parking, so there's no space in their block. Do we need to make some changes now for those people? So like for the person who lives above Haverford right now, where do they park?
Well, I guess I go back to the questions to the committee of whether we think we need the zones or not. As I said, I'll admit I'm not really a huge fan of the zone idea, because I'm just trying to think, especially as well if we want to incorporate like the online permit sort of stuff. The more complicated we make it, the harder that's going to be to do. And again, especially. Yeah, so I guess I'll just throw that out there.
Okay, so should we maybe talk about enforcement hours first then?
I think that then would lead to whether the zones are needed or not.
Yeah, because that is kind of why at least it appears that was their main reason for doing zones. They don't come out and say it, but yeah. Okay, so Bob, Rob, thoughts?
I don't have anything to add right now.
Yeah, I mean, the enforcement hours from the meeting in 2019, I think the previous manager mentioned something like a total of 100-something hours.
Yeah.
100 and trying to almost double the enforcement hours. I don't know, now we're in the midst of hiring a new employee. And so anyway, I'm not sure what you would see as feasible.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, like I said, I think it's okay to go beyond 40 hours a week, just understanding that the way this person would work is they're going to work 40 hours a week, and then just here and there, instead they do an occasional Saturday shift or an occasional night shift, just enough randomization in it so people, don't think, so there's a little bit of fear in people that they can't just, get away scot-free with breaking the parking regulations. So I guess and I'll admit, I mean, I drove heavily off Doylestown Borough just because I lived there and had to park there for, 5 or 6 years. And of course I lived in Lansdale Borough and Phoenixville Borough as well for a while. At least definitely when I went from Doylestown, and the parking there was along the lines of, it was, Sundays were free, no regulation. And then the 2-hour parking was from like, I don't want to get this wrong, but it seemed to follow the work day.
Yeah.
Like, so I guess, I don't want to say anything incorrect about how Doylestown does theirs. I would just say for Narberth, I would envision something like, 9 to 5 for the, for most of the borough. However, I could see a case being made that with the restaurants and all that sort of thing in the business district, would we want to do some sort of time beyond that to discourage people? Like, I would hate if I came home from work at 5 or 6 o'clock and there's a whole bunch of people parked in front of my on my street because they're like having dinner over on Haverford. So that would be the one place where I could see some different enforcement. Would be the streets that are closest to Haverford, where people, if they were trying to avoid paying the meters, might try and park. So
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on that. That's why I think we might want to consider having a designated area on the south side where there's currently lots of open parking, or maybe we could even find regions on the north side where there's lots of open parking. But sure, if people want to live, they want the convenience of downtown living, I think it's fine that we find them a parking space, but it doesn't have to be right in front of their house. It could be through the tunnel and a block away would be convenient. Currently, there's a lot on Grayling, Hamden, Iona. There's spaces up there, all along Windsor. But we might just want to have some designated parking.
Yeah. So I'm going to loop back to the hours, though, that Nelson Nygaard was suggesting. And I'm just, wanting to, they obviously thought that this was important to have this, really long, time period. So 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And
yeah, which I'll admit, I don't understand why, especially, I guess I'm thinking of the south side, and again, the portions of the borough further away from Haverford. I guess I don't understand why it would need to go that late. Because I can't envision, I'm trying to think who would be parking outside of 9 to, why would someone be parking in a residential portion of the borough that didn't live there?
That late. I know.
Yeah.
It's like, what are they trying to mitigate against? And then the north part, so the further reaches, they're saying noon to midnight. And I'm like, what is that for? I can't, I'm like, why? What is that trying to prevent? Who would come and who doesn't have a sticker and or doesn't have a permit and want to park at, say, 10 o'clock at night, well, no, 9 o'clock at night, and you're going to kick them out. You're going to say, hey, you get a ticket because you're not allowed to. I mean, if you're there at 9 at night, whose space have you taken?
Yeah, well, the one point on hours, I agree, that seems like excessive to me. I mean, that's quite a cost to the borough.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how we would justify that. That would be, I think that would require hiring a second full-time
clearly, yeah.
An entire new position.
Yeah.
So, but the one point is, it came from a resident, Barry McCarthy.
Yep.
I thought it was a good point about the 4 o'clock hour, 5 o'clock hour, and how it's possible for some people to kind of slot into those spots at 4 or 4:05 and then not be ticketed because it's the end of the workday for the parking controller.
Right.
So that I thought would be worth addressing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
At some point, we
Yeah.
don't have to figure it out now, but.
yeah, well, and I think the way that's addressed is we're talking about having some modified shifts at times. So I'm assuming that means that, and so if we said the enforcement period, what you put on the sign is 9 to 5, let's say, that there would certainly be days when the parking controller officer works 9 to 5. But then other days when they work 11 to 7.
Exactly.
And you don't know when they're going to do that. So, and after you've gotten some warnings or a ticket eventually, you might say, all right, I'm not going to play that game anymore. Or I'm willing to pay it and play the game and pay the fee, you know. Because, sometimes, I certainly have parked sometimes where I know the odds are I'll get a ticket and I'm going to pay it. It's okay. It's like, what are you going to do? Sometimes you have to do that. Okay.
Barbara, I have a question. Did we lose track of about the concern of overnight parking? Wanting to have a way to enforce the issue if there's cars just like say that come and park for 4 or 5 days that aren't residents.
Well,
I didn't want us to lose sight of that.
sure. Can you say a little more about that, Bob?
Well, I just fear I'm going to confuse everything. I'll discuss it offline with Samantha. And I think
This was raised by Barry
It just-
as well.
Yeah. Okay.
look, it just has to do. It just has.
Are you
It
talking
has
about
to do with the
just-
fact. It has to do with the fact that people will come and park in the unregulated spaces. Okay, I see it on Windsor. I know it happens other in other places of the borough. And I know it's happened for decades. People will they'll use Narberth as their long-term parking option, and they'll take the train to Center City and they'll go away, on a trip. I know they're doing it because I see them park their cars and they walk their luggagey thing to the train station, right? Sometimes whole families, okay? And what they do is they park their car in an unregulated space on Windsor Avenue or Grayling or Hamden or wherever, walk to the train station and then go on their vacation or whatever and then come back. I don't know that we want to be providing long-term parking for free. So I'm asking, did we lose sight of how do we enforce, if it's a problem, people parking overnight
Gotcha.
in that way?
And so here's what I would say. And yes, we will talk about how might we address that currently, but what I will say is if we made every street in the borough a regulated street, that problem goes away pretty quickly. Those people will realize, oh, I can't do that anymore.
Okay, good. Then we have not lost sight of that question. That's all I was asking. Did we I'm sorry, I can't. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. I need to be in the meeting because I can't track on what's being discussed. It sounds like we have not closed off that possibility of regulating that issue. So I'll just shut up now. It's fine.
That's a good comment, Bob.
No, it's a good comment. I don't think you should be feeling you should censor yourself at all there. That was fine. I think what you're making me question though is there something that we should be thinking about in this initial rollout that we're talking about is there something we could do that would address that, at least in these areas where we have regulated streets? But I'm not sure we can, because we're really talking about making changes just for streets that are currently regulated, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Bob, what you're pointing to is a problem.
We have addressed that issue. Currently, that issue is addressed by the 2-hour zone. No one's going to park their car for long-term parking in a currently regulated 2-hour zone. It's not going to happen. So it's just information for when we consider if we're going to regulate the entire borough.
Right.
That's all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good.
Cool. Okay.
I mean, there's one other related issue,
Sure.
which is the guest pass, the
Yeah.
use of guest passes, which Barry pointed out.
Yes.
You know, and that, I'm not
Well,
sure how to fix that, but.
Yes, and so before we, because I think guest passes is something we want to talk about, because we may want to make some changes to that in this process as well. But before we go off of that, do we want, are we, well, maybe the question of, do we have 3 zones eventually or not, is a longer term question. Part of this, I'm like, kind of looking at this like, okay, we've got a near term program that we want to put into place, and then possibly a far term program. So can we agree that the idea of whether we'd have any zones at all is a longer term thing?
Yeah.
And that in the near term, the enforcement hours for these regulated streets is going to be, I don't know, some time period that, do we want to set? I guess we probably have to have something in the ordinance, don't we? Yeah. So we're going to have to set something. Is this something that we'd want to get the chief's thoughts on, based on what they've seen happening? You know,
That's a pretty good idea, yeah.
because, you know, I'm like, maybe they've got some metrics that they can look at to say, this is when we really should be enforcing this.
Or even just anecdotally, from
Yeah.
their time patrolling the borough,
That's
they
true.
know that'd be great, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, Manager Brown, will you ask them for that?
Barbara, you're suggesting coming up with kind of a schedule? I mean, it's almost like a schedule for the controller. I mean, I guess it would vary.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't want to make that public exactly, but.
No,
Right.
but I think in the ordinance, we're gonna have to say,
Right.
this is when you could get a fine.
Right, right.
We're not gonna promise you that you're gonna get a fine. You're just taking a risk if you park in those hours and violate the law.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
Um,
So we could have some recommendation on that.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, so I just want to do a time check. We've got 10 minutes left. Do we have any members of the public in the?
We do have council member Winston, but I don't know if he has any public comment to make or anything like that. So if he's just listening.
No, I'm just watching, guys.
Okay, thanks, Ira. Okay, I just wanted to check because I'm like keeping an eye out in case, you know, I want to make sure we leave some time. So if anybody notices someone come in, and I haven't noticed, please let me know. So, so I think we could switch to then guest passes and talk about that a little bit. So when and this was something that I found very enlightening from watching this this meeting, was that that was something that the former borough manager described was going to be put into place, and that there was going to be a cost of $5 per day or $15 per week. The mayor suggested that we also have a monthly offering, because there might be people that have a need for, you know, more, and so then they wouldn't have to, you know, come in every week or whatever. And there was an ordinance adopted May 18th, 2019, but the accompanying resolution, where the fee schedule was, has nothing. So there's no fees.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that's, and I haven't had a chance to find the May 18th meeting and watch the discussion, but there was obviously a decision made to not have any fees. And so that means they are essentially unlimited, right? So I think the question for us is, you know, what do we think guest passes, how do we think that should work? Should they be time limited? Should there be a cost to have a guest pass?
Didn't we just do this? Didn't we recommend a policy on this already? Like, I'm remembering the last meeting or two. Thought we talked this through already.
Did we? And I've forgotten. That's possible.
Or were we just talking about the technology in relationship to guest passes, but not the fees?
Yeah, I think that might be it.
Okay. Those fees made sense to me that they were discussing.
Oh, the $5 and the $15.
Yeah, that seemed reasonable. And I think we talked about having the technological options of daily, weekly, monthly, annual, or I don't know if we talked about annually, but daily, weekly, monthly, it doesn't make sense to annually.
Yeah,
I'll say, I would even, I wasn't there for the original discussion, and I apologize, I did not watch.
That's
To be
okay.
honest, I did not do the homework on that. I would even question the fact that we allow monthly guest passes, but if that's the ordinance we have, I don't have a huge agitas about that. And our online system is set up to accommodate all three, it's just there aren't fees on it. So, I mean, yeah, my thought would be, let's just, throw the fees on the guest passes. I think that would go a long way towards discouraging people from using them.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the ordinance says daily, weekly, or monthly.
Yeah, I don't think it does either. I thought that was just something the mayor wanted.
Well, no, but in the resolution, so this is what kills me. The application fee for privileged parking permits shall be as follows, 0. And then on the back, the duration of time shall be as follows, and you have day, week, and month, but nothing filled in.
Sorry, can I see that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I was like, all right, there was some decision made to, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, if we wanted to get rid of the month,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have to do a new ordinance.
I don't think so, because I don't think it's in the ordinance here.
Well, then I guess the two questions that I would throw to the committee, we have the technology to, do and enforce the guest pass system. I guess I would just throw it out there to the committee, considering getting rid of the monthly option and setting up a fee for daily and weekly.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think so too.
Okay, so do you want to go with the $5 a day, $15 a week? That's what was discussed.
Yeah, and that seems real reasonable to me.
Okay, yeah.
And bucks,
Agreed.
it's like,
Agreed. If you have a family member visiting and you for $15 you can provide them parking for the week, that's a pretty good deal.
yeah, that certainly is. You'd pay a lot more if they were staying at a hotel and had to pay for parking.
Now, the one thing, actually, sorry, I'm like thinking while we're talking here, sorry to pull on another thread, is that what would stop someone, and this might be something I'm ignorant of that maybe Michelle Carroll knows, what would stop someone, instead of getting two, I guess just the hassle would be the only thing, instead of getting two hour permits, especially if we talk about raising the fees on those, to just getting like one and then like a guest pass. I guess so the weekly fee.
The weekly would add,
That's
I
true,
think, to
yeah.
be more.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
But I was wondering that too, but I think this.
You mean so that a resident could hand a visitor a guest pass or something? Is that the idea?
Well, a resident, for another resident, we get a guest pass, so that resident wouldn't have to get the 2 hour. But you're right, with the way, if we add fees onto the guest passes, that becomes a moot point.
Yeah, because this would become,
Yeah, very quickly.
$60
$500, $600 a year at 15 a week.
It's $60 a month, so who
Yeah.
would do that instead of paying,
You're right,
$50
sorry.
a year or $75
Yeah,
if it's,
but right, so that's why we need the guest pass fee.
And that's why we need another reason to have the fee.
Yeah.
And it only begins to reflect the true value. It's not even, it's probably worth more than that. But
Yeah.
it does cover, is it a reasonable fee, I mean, Samantha, in terms of our, covering
Yeah.
our costs and, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
cool, okay. Love it.
All right, so in that case, on the guest pass thing, I mean, I think that's something where, I think we go ahead and implement those changes. I don't think that disrupts the existing system really. So I would propose that me and the borough solicitor put together the resolution we need to do it.
Yep.
And introduce it. Maybe not, I don't think we'll be able to get it at the council work session meeting, but at the council business meeting in February, I think we could certainly introduce that resolution if the parking committee is okay with that.
Yeah, I think.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it makes sense to me to have that.
I think we do need a part of the one
Yeah,
question that came in from a neighbor, Carolyn
yeah,
Giordano.
oh, yes.
Was, this concern that if, say, grandparents are coming in to help take care of children, and it's very last minute,
Yeah.
a concern about getting the guest pass in a kind of last minute situation. So I don't know exactly how it would work, but.
Well, I think that's the great thing about having, the online system for it. You could do that, people could do that 24/7.
And presumably the homeowner would do it for the guest.
Yeah,
So the guest doesn't have to be tech savvy.
exactly, yeah.
Or even know where would I go find, even if they are tech savvy, where the heck is that? Because I don't know, I'm visiting.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. It'd be the homeowner
Yeah.
who would take care of it, and again, they could do it online 24/7.
Okay.
And I guess if there's a homeowner who's not tech savvy, they can always come into the borough
Yeah,
and they can call, either one. So the only place where there's maybe, a glitch for that person is on the weekend. But,
and I actually just thinking about enforcement hours, that almost as well makes me kind of strengthen my thought that enforcement hours maybe shouldn't start until 9, because the borough office opens at 8.
yeah,
So if someone did have to contact the borough office about it,
yeah,
there would be kind of like an hour period there before we'd start enforcement,
that's a good
where
idea.
someone could actually come down here, or if they left us a voicemail or email or whatever, we could, check in and deal with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, that's good.
Yeah, I like that idea. And
Oh, Barbara and everyone, I apologize that I must go now, and I apologize for how if my participation was disruptive. I really appreciate you including me, and I'll be in person in future. So thank you.
Bob, it wasn't disruptive at all. Thank you for
Yeah,
joining us. We
very
know
helpful.
you
Thank you,
had a
Bob.
difficult
Bye bye.
morning, so,
Thanks again. Bye bye.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Samantha, that, to give that period of time. And so then that kind of only leaves, Saturday and Sunday, but we're not enforcing, we're not suggesting enforcement on Sunday, I don't think. Saturday, yeah. So I think that addresses those concerns. Thank you for pulling us to those, Rob. I appreciate that. Okay. So we're almost at 10 o'clock. Is there anything else that we want to talk about today? And I can't think of anything, so I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go back and go through the questions and see what we've answered and what questions we still have, and get the questions ready for our next meeting. I'm like, we're just going to keep going until we get all of them crossed off.
Yeah.
No, I think it's really great. I think each committee meeting, I think we are getting questions answered. And I think the great thing, from my perspective is, pretty much every council meeting, there's something on the agenda from this committee for them to take action on. So I think this committee is definitely producing results for the community.
Yeah. And we're keeping council busy.
Sure.
This is great. All right, thank you. I'm gonna, I'll just mention that our next meeting is the second Tuesday of February, and I'm sorry, but I forget what that date is.
That will be February 8th.
8th, thank you. And at 9 a.m. That's our set time now, so I'll adjourn our meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.